I'm delighted to introduce Trend 5 Talk of the Day 2, which will be given by Claire Venables. Claire is a qualified English teacher who has been dedicated to ELT since 2001. After a decade in Spain, she moved to Brazil in 2011, where she has worked on the creation and implementation of bilingual programs in schools as a school consultant, an international speaker, and materials writer. I would add an inspiration here as well, okay? During Claire's talk, we recommend watching in speaker view, and if you have any questions, please type them in the Q&A box. Without any further ado, please share your screen, Claire.
Hello, and welcome to this webinar, and a big thank you to Bruno for that lovely introduction. This is a 30-minute talk, so I'd like to jump straight in. I couldn't possibly do that without first finding out who I have here. So if you wouldn't mind taking a moment to let me know if you're a teacher or coordinator, or perhaps something else, and let me know where you're currently based. While you're going to do that, I'll take a moment to introduce myself a little more, and I'd like to tell you about why I wanted to give this talk today, give you a bit of context for this topic. As Bruno said, I've been dedicated to ELT since 2001, and over the years I have taught all ages and proficiency levels. But without a doubt, my true passion has always been and always will be teaching young learners. But since then, since moving to Brazil, of course, I've been involved in lots of other things. I was a director of studies, as Bruno mentioned, a materials writer, a teacher educator. I have my own business, Active English. And like everyone else, I was completely caught off guard when the pandemic hit. After almost 2 decades in the classroom, I was just settling into my full-time role in teacher education. So I admit, I went into panic mode when I saw teachers struggling to adapt to emergency remote teaching. And I'm going to be honest, I felt completely unable and unqualified really to help them. In much the same way that teachers had to reinvent their practice, I too have struggled to find ways of reinventing mine. My training, you see, was always very much linked to my experience in the classroom, and I could connect with teachers because they knew I was one of them. I knew firsthand what they were going through, but now it's different. I've never taught online. I have never worked in a classroom with social distancing. The best way I found to continue to support teachers in my community was to create a space where we could connect and learn and share with one another. And this is where I began to learn more about the power of collective teacher efficacy and its positive impact on learner outcomes. For those of you who haven't heard of this before, collective teacher efficacy is when groups of educators share the belief that they have a positive impact on learner achievement. But this belief doesn't just come from the heart. This belief needs to be fueled by evidence. And when this happens, teachers who believe they have a positive impact usually do. But what I quickly realized as I started to implement this concept, which I got from Jenny Donoghue, I'll link to her in my last slide. What I quickly realized from my work with teachers all over Brazil is that efficacy is only possible if there are substantial levels of engagement and well-being. And we all know that the greater someone's engagement, the greater their commitment to a team's success and the results generated. There is substantial evidence from this. There's a meta study actually by Gallup, and the latest edition, the 10th edition released in 2020, shows that. But even better, according to the same institution, it was interesting for me to learn that workplace burnout is reduced to near zero among engaged employees. So you can see how the more I learned about this, the more interested I got in it. And then I realized that my challenge was and still is not necessarily to like train the team right now, but I need to re-engage them after everything they've been through since 2020. And I know I don't need to say anything more about this to this particular audience. You know what last year was like for our field. And we all know what the levels of burnout are like in education. So today I want to talk about something different. I want to talk about something very practical. And what I'd like to share with you is how we're using weekly surveys to build up a picture of the levels of engagement among the teaching teams I'm working with right now, and how I plan to use this data to better inform the decisions that we make about future professional development initiatives while ensuring the well-being of the teachers. Now, I don't have definitive results yet, but I think that now is the time to start sharing what I've learned so far with the wider community. And this is because I believe, as I'm sure we all here do, that doing what's best for teachers is aligned with what is doing best, or what is best for students and the school. And I'm hoping that you'll walk away from this talk with a new perspective on engagement and with some practical ideas that you can implement in your own teaching or professional contexts. So that's what we're looking at today. And let's jump in now and let me tell you exactly what it is that we're going to be doing. This session, what I'd like to talk about in this session, first of all, starts off by looking at what engagement in the workplace is and what it isn't. And I'll confess that I had the wrong idea about this, and it wasn't until I started digging into the topic that I really came to a better understanding of it. And then, of course, why should this be a priority for school leaders? Teacher engagement and school success are so linked, but let's have a look how this actually benefits everyone before sharing with you this 3-step process for generating engagement in the workplace and what you can do with it. So this is it. You ready to dive into this with me? I hope so. This is going to be a super quick breeze through. And let's start off with what engagement in the workplace is not, because engagement has become a bit of a buzzword. We're very used to hearing about, and rightly so, but hearing a lot about family engagement and student engagement, super important topics, but little is said about teacher engagement. And I'm going to go one step further, maybe out on a limb here, and say that there's a lot of confusion about what engagement is. And I think that it's often mistaken for involvement or satisfaction or motivation. It certainly was among the teams I'm working with. And I wonder if it is the same for you. So let me give you an example. How many schools do you know that offer teachers free professional development opportunities, or maybe even pay their teachers to attend teacher development? It might be in the form, for example, of webinars. This is, in my opinion, this is something that should be seen as a bonus. It's free training. It's the school investing in and providing support for its team. And in fact, this is a strategy that I'm implementing. I'm organizing these free webinars, monthly webinars. And in this attempt to measure engagement, we have been taking the attendance at these webinars. But what's happened is that coordinators who are feeling a bit of a pressure to have high attendance, it's not been deliberate, it's been a natural consequence, would in turn unintentionally pressure the teachers to be there on a Monday night. I wonder if this sounds familiar. I'm sure it does. I'm sure it must sound familiar. This is not an innovation on my part to be offering this. This is something that a lot of good schools do. So the teachers are involved, but not necessarily engaged. In fact, I began to suspect that this was having the opposite effect. It's not that the webinars weren't good. The satisfaction surveys we did were positive. The speakers were great, but the informal complaints the teachers were making showed that while happy with the content, the pressure to be there was creating a certain resentment, especially when events coincided, or these sort of webinars coincided with personal commitments, family events. Maybe they had private classes or much needed rest. So while satisfaction is a fundamental pillar of engagement, measuring and ensuring satisfaction in the work environment, that's only a maintenance tool. Despite what I believed at the time, these webinars weren't ever going to bring us the level of engagement that we needed. So I had to stop confusing their involvement and satisfaction with engagement. And when we discussed this as a team, I heard things like, oh, teachers aren't motivated to join, they need motivation. But motivation levels are a poor measure of engagement as well. And this might sound counterintuitive, so let me explain. A motivated but disengaged team is always waiting for an incentive that's worth the effort. So this puts a lot of pressure on the coordinator or the team leader to get them excited, or me to get the team excited. And it's exhausting. So when the encouragement and the motivating stop, so do they. Let me go back to the example of the webinars, if I may. So the attendance numbers that we were getting and the satisfaction surveys, it was all shared and compared in the meetings with the coordinators. And again, although this was completely unintentional, this did generate a little bit of rivalry between these three schools. And it wasn't a nasty thing at all. I don't want to come across as if it was all in fun. But this ended up being passed on to the teaching team. And for a while, the attendance levels were great and motivation was high. But again, this was not a reflection of the teachers' engagement in our program. And unsurprisingly, attendance dropped off when coordinators stopped competing with each other. Engaged people act proactively, don't they? And they're self-motivated because they believe in the work that they do. So motivation is incredibly important, but it's still not to be confused with engagement, and it doesn't reap the same benefits. And I know when I retell this story, I'm aware of how it sounds. It sounds really obvious when I retell it, but imagine and think about what you're doing at the moment with your schools when you're getting, what kind of feedback are you getting for your team? Attendance to webinars and satisfaction surveys feel like they would be a good indicator of a happy, engaged team. But this is not engagement. And this is what I want to share with you next. So if engagement is not involvement, motivation, or satisfaction, which is what we typically measure, what is engagement in the workplace? There are so many answers to this question because engaging a group of people is a complex task with so many variables. Each person has their own motivations. Each person has their own aspirations and desires and insecurities. So it's a real challenge, isn't it, to balance all of these? How do we balance all of these? I'd like to share with you that the 10 pillars that are the basis for the methodology that was adapted in the schools that I'm working with. It's on the next slide. You might like to screenshot this and have a look into it afterwards. So these are the 10 pillars. Recognition, feedback, happiness, welfare, relationship with the coordinator or DOS or boss, relationship with colleagues, personal growth, alignment, satisfaction, and commitment to the school or organization. And I've kind of adapted them to fit into the educational context, but these are true of any field. And these are all areas which need to be worked on consistently, because generating engagement at work is not an action, but a process. There's no silver bullet. There's no single initiative that will increase the level of engagement. But for me, at least, this has become essential work, and here's why. The demands at the schools that I work with are high. And even though we're not teaching remotely anymore, the challenges continue as we now we're now trying to mitigate this negative impact that the past 18 months have had on our students' learning, but also, of course, on their engagement themselves and their well-being. I'm pretty sure that all of you will be familiar with this same situation. We're all facing the same thing as we move back to face-to-face classes. And I'll say it again, the demands on teachers are high, really high. But how can we possibly expect to meet any of these demands when they're feeling on the edge of burnout? How can we expect them to rise to the challenge when they're not engaged in the cause? So if I asked my teaching community, and I have, but if I asked them hypothetically, the vast majority of them, I'm sure, would say, reduce our workload, reduce it, stop making us do all of these things. But here's something interesting that I discovered in my own informal research that I think you'll be interested to hear. Because reducing the workload feels like it would be an obvious solution. And what I discovered is that teachers who feel happy with the school administration and those who don't have very similar workloads. I want to make it clear at this point that what I'm about to share is completely anecdotal evidence. It is nothing empirical, but it is worth sharing all the same, because I do have a very engaged community of close to 10,000 teachers on social media. And this has been a wonderful place for me to do this kind of informal yet very insightful dig into how teachers are feeling and acting. So when I asked them if they felt that the school administration made their lives easier or harder, it was 78% of them who said harder. 78%. Now, I don't think that's a surprise, considering the context, but it's still very sad, especially when I know how hard the coordinators in my circle work and how 100% of the coordinators I know would say that the well-being of their teachers is a priority. 78% said harder. Okay, so is that a surprise to you? What was a surprise for me was when I dug a little deeper and I questioned people from both groups. I found the demands the schools placed on them were surprisingly similar. But it was the way that they felt about it that was completely opposite. I'll give you two examples. Let's go back to teacher development again. A lot of them mentioned teacher development. And the first group said, they make us go to these extra teacher training sessions and it's outside of our work hours and it's horrible. And they also said things like they force us to develop the curriculum from scratch, or they make us go to these meetings where we have to develop the curriculum. And these were complaints, and they felt that these were very negative things. And then in contrast, the teachers, the other group who felt very happy about it, would cite the exact same activities, but in very different terms. It would be, we get given free teacher development. We are invited, we are heard, our opinion counts when it comes to curriculum design and development. So the difference here was not in the workload, but how they feel. And this only served to confirm what I was intuitively feeling. While teachers need a realistic workload and a good paycheck, it takes more than that to create a team that's invested in their work and willing to be able to meet the demands of being a young learner teacher. Engaged employees, I love this quote, engaged employees produce better business outcomes than other employees across industry, across company size, across nationality, and in good economic times and bad. So if you're the owner of a school and you're watching this today, let it be known, it pays to invest in this topic. It pays to invest in your teachers and engaging them. But we're talking about people working in education. So how much more important does this become? Teacher engagement is about much more than meeting business goals, in my opinion. It's about removing barriers to economic opportunity. It's about, I'm thinking specifically in the context that I'm living in here, folks, in Brazil. This is about providing quality education and equity for already marginalized groups in our society. And I know this is not just in Brazil. I'm thinking now about the young learner teachers who are working here in public schools, where over 5 million girls and boys aged 6 to 17 did not have access to education in November of last year. It's not dramatic when I say that we're facing an education crisis. These are statistics from UNICEF 2021. So it's not dramatic either to say that teacher engagement and well-being needs to be the first step to plan anything that's going to potentially mitigate learning loss. So this has all been on my mind, as you can tell, a lot. And I've thought about the process of managing and improving the workplace environment and teacher morale. It's really multifaceted. And I know that it presents great challenges. And I'm going to be honest with you again. I confess that it wasn't until very recently that I've seen this as part of my responsibilities. I don't own a school. I'm not a coordinator. I come in and I'm there to develop the team professionally, but I believe that I can't do my job effectively unless I have engagement from my team. Does any of this resonate with you and the work you do, or maybe even as a teacher, how you feel? So this is what happened. HR, I work for a chain of schools. I worked for 3 schools in this big chain. And when HR began implementing weekly surveys to measure engagement across the entire company, I jumped on this. I saw this was the perfect opportunity for me. You see, what's happening is this. They're using surveys which are specifically designed to measure engagement. And for me, I'm going to use this with dual objectives. Firstly, this is a way of giving the team a say, letting them be heard. How important is this? But it's also an opportunity to evaluate the success or failure of any initiatives that I'm going to implement in an attempt to engage the team. And this is really important for me because of the following. When you work for a big network of schools like I do, data is the language that is best understood and received. Numerical evidence is what I need to get any significant changes made to improve the conditions in the workplace. And to be honest with you as well, evidence is what I need. It's evidence that will fuel my sense of self-efficacy. Am I doing a good job? Is this the right decision to be making? As we saw earlier in the 10 pillars that I shared, to engage your team, you need more than just satisfaction, motivation, and involvement. It's part of it, but you also need to create a sense of belonging among the team. And the best way to do this is to ask for their opinions. So for the past few months, teachers have been sent, this is the process now, teachers have been sent automatically an online survey weekly, right? With just 5 questions to answer. And this measures the temperature. Previously, perhaps I think this is something very typical in schools, correct me if I'm wrong, but we do use surveys to get feedback from teachers, but they don't happen very regularly. And in where I've been working, it's usually been at the end of a period where it feels very late to be correcting anything. So these have been shared, specifically shared, the questions in these have been specifically selected to measure how teachers are feeling in regards to those 10 pillars from before. And this for me is really how to engage, how I am engaging or generating engagement on the team. To do this, or this survey, you might like to screenshot the next slide as well, because I'm going to share with you the 12 questions. These are the Gallup's Q12, based on the Q12 instrument that they designed to measure employee engagement conditions. So these are based on a lot of resources, a lot of research. This isn't me and the team sitting around inventing these questions for the survey. These are the questions that choose 5 of these each week, send them off to the team, will gauge in engagement. That's them there. But it's not enough to be collecting data from teachers each week, right? They need to feel that their answers are being heard and having an impact. And transparency about the results of these surveys, sharing how they will be interpreted, and inviting staff to give more direct input about how these will be acted upon. That's the next step for me in this process. The next step, that's right. I would love to be here today, tonight, this morning, wherever you are, I would love to be here saying, and this is what we're doing, and I've taken this evidence, and I've been so tempted to do that. I've been so tempted to race forward and make changes and do lots of things with this data that I've gotten. But I think it's important to say, I'm not dragging my feet, but there is a reason why I'm slowing down. Getting honest, constructive feedback is a tricky business, especially if you're implementing this for the first time. So I need to give it time to become part of the school culture. But as soon as this happens, I will be in the perfect position to act. And those are the 3 steps: question, respond, and act. So the survey, and then the getting together and responding to this feedback, being transparent, coming up with solutions to potential problems that we identify. And then I can act with data in my hands and co-constructed bottom-up solutions. This is going to put me, I think, in the perfect position to propose the kinds of institutional changes that could benefit the entire school community. I think too often we, no, let me speak for myself. Too often I have made decisions based on intuition and with very mixed outcomes. So I'm excited about the possibilities that this methodology could potentially offer and the way it could change the effectiveness of teacher training that I offer in schools. If you'd like to try something similar in your context, I would love to get in contact with you and share and learn more with you. This is something that I'm implementing now, but like I said, it's something that I would wanted to share with this community at this specific moment. If you'd like to learn more about the topics that I've raised today, here are some resources and further reading that I would recommend, including the website for the company that developed the software that we're currently using. And I want to say this because I'm not sponsored or affiliated with them in any way, but there are some useful resources there. And this has been a catalyst for my interest and research into the topic of teacher engagement, and perhaps it will be for you as well. This is going to bring me now, I think, to the very end, if I'm not correct. David, I think we've reached the end of my time, but I would like to sum up by saying that if we've learned anything in the past 18 months, it's that collective teacher efficacy is key to improving student outcomes, especially through any major change or period of change or challenge that we're facing. However, to achieve this, we need engaged teachers. And this doesn't happen spontaneously. It has to be planned for and integrated into the school culture. So teacher engagement is one of the key factors which will determine the success or failure of your CPD initiative. So if this has been interesting or useful for you, please get in contact. I want to explore this more. I'd love suggestions or advice or your experience as well, but it would be really useful. And you can reach me on Instagram, where I interact and share regularly, or can contact me directly via email to talk more about this and how you're developing your team. So on that note, thank you very much to the IATF or Young Learner Team SIG for inviting me to present, and enjoy the rest of the event.
Thanks, Claire, for outlining how engagement affects our teaching practices. I'm sure that all teachers felt inspired and motivated to develop their engagement practices. I loved when you said that engaged people are motivated, because we usually mistake these two things. Let me see if we have time for questions. No, we don't have any time. So we are going to have a 5-minute break now, and we'll come back. Thanks so much, Claire.